Hip-hop just witnessed the kind of moment that doesn't just trend, it rewrites the rules. Drake, the artist who's spent over a decade at the very top, untouchable, unstoppable, unshakable, just got exposed. And not by a rumor, not by a slip-up, but by something far more dangerous. Respectable destruction. Kendrick Lamar. The most calculated voice in the game, and Rakim, one of the genre's literal architects, have joined forces not through a diss track, not through a press run, but through alignment. And that alignment just sent a message across every studio, every boardroom, every mic in the game. If you don't have bars, you don't have a future. No mercy, no survivors. The culture has a new heartbeat, and if you blink right now, you're going to miss history being made in real time. Hashtag respect the bars, hashtag hip-hop shift at Kendrick Lamar at Rakim. Empire that thought it was untouchable for over a decade. One name hovered over every chart, every award, stage, every conversation about the top of hip-hop. Drake. He wasn't just successful. He was inevitable. He turned features into hits, leaks into events, personal drama into marketing. His empire wasn't built on bars alone. It was built on timing, melody, brand, reach, and relentless visibility. Drake wasn't just a rapper. He was a one-man economy. ND. In the middle of all that stability, a tremor hit. Not a diss track, not a public feud, but something scarier. A shift in gravity. Kendrick Lamar, the quiet assassin of the modern era, didn't come with a cheap shot. He came with a crown, held it out, and placed it not on his own head, but on that of Rakim, one of the architects of the entire culture. It wasn't just a salute. It was a line in the sand. By pointing to Rakim, Kendrick was saying, this is what rap was built on. This is where skill lives. This is what the throne should still answer to. And in one gesture, every artist suddenly found themselves standing next to a measuring stick they hadn't seen in years. For Drake, this was dangerous, not because Kendrick attacked him, but because Kendrick didn't have to. He changed the conversation without even mentioning a name. He reset the terms. Suddenly, streams, charts, even viral moments didn't feel like armor anymore. What mattered again, brutally, beautifully, was ability. Not presence, not aesthetic, not connections. Ability, and that's the one place Drake's empire has always been most fragile. Not that Drake can't rap, he can. But his brand was never built on fearless competition. It was built on polish. He's the architect of mass appeal rap, not street-certified war. When the tone shifts from vibes to combat, the king who wins with charm finds himself standing on a battlefield armed with conversation pieces, not weapons. Within hours of Kendrick's alignment with Rakim, fans began dragging old verses out of the vault. Clips resurfaced of Rakim's labyrinthine schemes, complex, coded, effortless, bars that sounded like puzzles you wanted to solve. Next to them, some of Drake's pop-forward tracks suddenly felt like soft targets. It wasn't fair. Context rarely is, but in hip-hop, perception is blood. Threads lit up across X, Reddit, Instagram. Fans posted lines from Kendrick, Rakim, even Nas, Black Thought, Lupe, Cole. A lineage of lyrical monsters with captions like, "This is what they mean." Some fans defended Drake, others laughed. Many simply got quiet. 'Cause in moments like this, the culture stops debating sales and starts asking, who do you fear on a mic? Labels scrambled. Managers started revisiting talking points. Publicists begged for patience. And in private circles, a dangerous question floated through. If Drake is no longer the standard, who is? That's the kind of question that empties. THRONES. It wasn't just about Drake. It was about the entire system that had relied on safe stars and predictable output. If Kendrick just flipped the lights back on skill, a lot of the industry's top earners suddenly looked unprepared. The streets smelled it first. Mixtape chatter picked up. Local ciphers got louder. YouTube freestyles started doing numbers. Real rappers, the kind who never cared for industry validation, began seeing a lane opening right in front of them. A lane where the mainstream just got soft-spotted, and the real were free to swarm. This wasn't chaos. This was correction. For years, hip-hop had danced between artistry and accessibility, with accessibility usually winning the paycheck. But art doesn't die. It hibernates. And when it wakes angry. That's what Kendrick triggered. Not by yelling, not by attacking, by honoring. By pointing back to where the roots still live. By saying, this matters again. And that's how empires fall in hip-hop. Not always by being struck, but by being outclassed in real time. Every genre has its own no moments, those seconds when even the people who pretend they're in control stop pretending. In hip-hop, they're usually loud. A diss track, a public meltdown, a shocking betrayal. This time, it wasn't noise. It was absence. No screaming, no beef posts. Just silence where confidence used to be. You could feel it in offices from Toronto to LA. The people who build and sell the sound started talking like humans again, not marketers. No one said, Drake's done. They said something scarier. The conversation changed. That's code for our playbook doesn't work right now. A junior A&R described it like this in a group chat. It's like watching your favorite stock fall, but nothing's wrong with the company. The market just woke up and remembered fundamentals. Translation, bars are back. And if your roster isn't built to swing with bars, you're holding a bag of expensive liabilities. Publicists tried to frame it as a celebration. Kendrick showing love to a legend. But underneath the spin, people were running numbers. How many of our streams depend on vibe first, lyrics later? How many of our stars can freestyle cold if a mic is shoved in their face tomorrow? How many look like they belong in a lineage now being honored in real time? The quiet questions are the loudest ones. They creep into meeting rooms like smoke. You can't see the fire yet, but you can smell it. Managers started rearranging calendars. Some artists were told to finish that verse before they post anything. Studio engineers were booked at hours they hadn't seen in years. 4 a.m. sessions, not because inspiration struck, but because urgency did. On socials, something weirder happened. Fans stopped arguing about streams and started quoting lyrics. Entire comment sections turned into cipher breakdowns. Did you catch the internal rhyme in bar 6? Became a trending flavor of conversation. When the audience tilts like that, marketing money burns fast. You can't buy respect in a room full of people grading craft again. Meanwhile, the artists, the ones with egos made of steel and insecurities made of glass, sat with a new kind of pressure. Not can I top the charts? But do I still belong at the table? That's an existential question for someone who built their career on control. Drake publicly said nothing. Privately, according to 2 different producers whispering in different corners of the same rumor mill, he asked the only smart question left. Do I answer this with music, or do I leave it alone? Trap of moments like this. If you respond wrong, you look scared. If you don't respond at all, the silence writes its own story. And right now, the story already has blood in the title, and it wasn't just about Drake. Other chart kings and queens artists who hadn't written a verse in months. It's because melody paid better than metaphor felt the temperature drop. Suddenly, what counted wasn't playlist placement. It was breath control, not viral dance trends, cadence, not collabs. Combat. Industry veterans knew the pattern. They'd seen it with Nas and Jay, with 50 and Jay, with Wayne re-weaponizing mixtapes. When the culture starts hunting for skill, the shiny castles built on mood collapse first. Label execs started whispering about a skills gap. They didn't mean it like HR jargon. They meant half our headliners can't survive if this mood lasts more than 3 months. Even brand partners flinched. Fashion labels and liquor companies don't like volatility. They like sure bets. Right now, the sure bet Drake, safe, friendly, global, looked like a question mark in a genre suddenly craving gladiators. Not diplomats. Through all this, Kendrick stayed invisible. Rakim, as always, stayed untouchable. That's what made it lethal. The move didn't need follow-up. It echoed by itself. Every hour that passed without a rebuttal turned the echo into a verdict. And for fans, the only jury that ever mattered. The verdict wasn't cancel Drake. It was subtler, sharper. Prove you still belong. That's how you end up with a whole ecosystem moving like prey, even though nobody fired a shot. Not one diss, not one insult. Just two names standing side by side like a quiet bomb in the middle of the map, and when the room finally realized it was bleeding, the talking stopped. The planning started. No survivors. Not because Kendrick and Rakim wanted casualties, but because the game doesn't keep passengers when the terrain shifts. The next chapter would belong to whoever had the courage and the pen to walk back into the fire. In hip-hop, fear is contagious, but so is courage. Once the room stops screaming and starts breathing, the natural law kicks in. Somebody is going to test the air. Always, not out of disrespect. Out of hunger. The first sparks didn't come from the A-list. It never does. It came from the margins, a verse tucked at the end of a mixtape from a kid with nothing to lose. No feature, no cosign. Just a voice like sandpaper and bars like broken glass. He wasn't aiming at Drake or Kendrick, okay? He was aiming at a standard. Y'all forgot what this felt like. Let me remind you, the internet caught it in hours. A clip ripped off SoundCloud landed on X with the caption, "Is this the energy we need back?" Thousands of retweets later, the conversation had a new layer. Not just who's in danger, but who's next. Within a week, other hungry voices followed. A freestyle on a radio show in New York lit up comment sections. This is the first time I've had to rewind in years. A woman in Chicago dropped a 2-minute verse over a dusty 90s loop. It spread like wildfire. Clips of Rakim and Kendrick, side by side on timelines, were now being stitched with these new names. Like the baton was being passed in real time. Inside studios, veterans sat up straighter. They weren't panicking anymore. They were itching. There's a muscle memory in every true MC. You can bury it under endorsements and pop features, but you can't kill it. And when the climate smells like war, that muscle starts twitching. A mid-tier rapper who hadn't been on a blog in years suddenly booked studio time like he was broke again. Platinum artist quietly called an old producer and said, "Let's make something dangerous." They weren't all aiming at Drake. Most weren't aiming at anyone. They were chasing that feeling. The adrenaline of being judged by craft instead of optics. The headlines lagged behind the streets. Blogs were still chasing the Kendrick-crowned Rakim angle, while underneath a micro-renaissance had started. It wasn't visible yet on charts. It was audible in basements, in small shows, in Twitch freestyles, in Discord rooms where verses were dissected like crime scenes. And Drake, still silent, but silence isn't stillness. Behind closed doors, he was listening. Two different engineers, off the record, told similar stories. Studio doors locked, phones confiscated, no cameras, no entourage. Just a beat folder full of danger. One of them said, "He's not scared. He's mad." That's worse in a good way. That's the paradox. The same culture that can expose you can also save you if you answer right. Hip-hop doesn't demand perfection. It demands authentic stakes. If Drake raps like a man with nothing to prove, nobody cares. He raps like a man with everything to reclaim. People lean in. Meanwhile, Rakim kept doing what legends do. Nothing. His entire contribution had already landed like a meteor. His job wasn't to participate. It was to exist as a reminder. And Kendrick, somewhere in a quiet Los Angeles corner, watching the noise swirl like a storm he summoned but didn't have to touch. That's the eerie beauty of it all. Nobody fired a shot. Yet the battlefield is full. Careers that felt predictable are suddenly in play. Rookie names are being spoken in the same breath as Hall of Famers. The algorithm, usually a stubborn gatekeeper, is chasing verses it used to ignore it and the culture, which sometimes feels like it's just chasing trends in a loop, suddenly feels alive again, dangerous, volatile, fun. This is what No Survivors really looks like. Not bodies, not cancellations, no comfort zones. The old hierarchy is cracked, not by beef, but by expectation. If you can't keep up, the timeline will forget you. Not out of hate, but out of hunger. And for the first time in years, every studio light burning at 3 a.m. feels like it matters. Every cycle ends the same way. Somebody survives. The question is never if hip-hop will adjust. With it, what Kendrick and Rakim did wasn't just a move, it was a mirror. They didn't flip a table. They showed everyone what the table used to look like. And suddenly, a lot of folks saw their own reflection and didn't like what they saw. By the end of the first month, the ripple had become a wave. The playlists started looking strange. Less algorithmic candy, more raw cuts with teeth. A throwback freestyle from the early 2000s went viral after a fan stitched it next to Kendrick's nod to Rakim. Comment sections read like classrooms. People weren't arguing about who looked cooler in a video. They were arguing about rhyme density, wordplay, breath control. Even the big names, the ones with stadium tours booked and marketing deals signed, couldn't hide from it. They saw the crowd singing along to hooks, like always. But when a rapper on a smaller stage spit something dense, the roar was different. It wasn't hype, it was respect. That's the kind of noise that makes accountants nervous and artists restless. Drake had a choice, the same choice every artist in his position eventually gets handed. Double down on comfort or risk everything for respect. The safe route was obvious. Keep dropping melodies, keep the playlists fed, wait for the mood to pass. But moods that touch the roots don't pass quietly. They linger. They infect. Rumors leaked intentionally or not of long studio nights with writers who actually scare other writers. Rumors of verses scrapped, beats switched, features canceled. If you read between the lines, you could see the pivot. Less formula, more fight. He wasn't chasing Kendrick. He was chasing relevance in a climate where the rules he mastered had been replaced by the rules he'd quietly sidestepped. Other artists felt the shift like weather. A few fled, booking acting gigs, fashion collabs, anything that could keep them in headlines without facing a mic. Others stepped up. Some dropped. Surprise freestyles. Some leaked demos that had been buried for sounding too lyrical just months ago. The quiet ones, the ones who'd been in love with the pen before the playlist, started smiling again. Behind the glass walls of labels, the new conversations weren't about trends. They were about training. One exec reportedly said in a meeting, "We've been hiring influencers, not rappers." Another, "If we don't find writers, we're going to lose the next decade." That's not panic. Tay's admission. And admissions are the first step in either evolution or extinction. Rakim, touched by all the noise, walked into a small club in Brooklyn one night, unannounced, spit a verse that had people in the back with their phones down, not recording, just listening. No hook, no beat drop, just air moving with purpose. For a week, that clip was hip-hop's heartbeat. Kendrick stayed quiet, letting the world spin around the gravity he'd created. That's how you know the power is real, when silence says more than a press run ever could. And in between the giants, the next generation started to harden. They were watching in real time how a shift works, not with beef, but with pressure. The same pressure that either cracks the unprepared or cuts the next diamond. By the end of the quarter, the charts looked almost normal again to anyone not paying attention. But the DNA had changed. You could hear it in the hooks, tighter. Smarter, you could hear it in the features, riskier, sharper. Even the casual hits carried a trace of care. The culture had been reminded what it was capable of. And once reminded, it doesn't forget. Drake wasn't gone. He wasn't dethroned. But the throne he'd sat on without challengers now had teeth marks. It no longer belonged to whoever sold the most. It belonged, once again, to whoever could. Prove it. And that's a much more dangerous, much more honest hip-hop. That's what No Survivors really meant. Not death. Disruption. Nobody walked away untouched. Not artists, not labels, not fans. Everyone had to decide whether they wanted the old game back or whether they were willing to fight for the better one standing right in front of them. And quietly, somewhere in that shift, a kid nobody's heard of yet just wrote a verse that will be quoted for decades, because that's how this works. This isn't just drama. It's not a headline for the algorithm. This is the sound of a culture remembering what it's capable of. Kendrick didn't drop a diss. Rakim didn't fire a shot. Together, they lit a fuse that reminded every rapper, every fan, every label what this really is. A craft. And now, the smoke's still in the air. The silence is louder than the hits. The question isn't who's next to get exposed. It's who's brave enough to step forward. If you're a fan, listen with your gut, not your feed. If you're an artist, sharpen up. The throne is no longer locked. It's alive, dangerous, waiting. Hip-hop has a heartbeat again. And it's not polite. It's war ready. Stay tuned. Stay loud. #respect the bars. #hip hop lives at Kendrick Lamar, at Therakim, at Champakamne Poppy.